Revenge isn't a dish served cold. It's served wearing a $6,000 silk dress on the arm of a man who could buy and sell the room with a flick of his wrist. When Sadie's ex sent an invite to his wedding, he wanted her to show up broken. He wanted a pathetic, crying victim to make his new bride feel like a queen. He didn't expect her to walk through those heavy mahogany doors with Roman Costa. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was raining, the kind of relentless, freezing drizzle that made the city look like an open wound. Sadie stood in the cramped kitchen of her apartment, staring at the envelope. It was thick, expensive, the kind of heavy cotton paper that cost more per sheet than she spent on groceries in a week. Gold foil embossed the front. Sadie Miller. No +1. She slid her thumb under the flap and tore it open. Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Davies request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Chloe to Mr. Caleb Reynolds. Caleb. In her old circle, the insular, suffocating world of the city's old money and quiet power, they didn't just use the word fiancé. They used the term mate. It was an archaic tradition, a label meant to signify a bond that couldn't be broken by something as trivial as a changing mind. People chose their mates, and their families locked their assets, their reputations, and their futures together. Until Caleb found a better offer. Chloe Davies wasn't just younger. She was the daughter of a federal judge. Sadie was just the daughter of a disgraced accountant who died leaving a mountain of debt. Caleb hadn't just broken an engagement. He had gutted her reputation, drained the joint accounts they shared, and left her holding the bag for a lease she couldn't break and loans she couldn't pay. He was marrying Chloe in 3 weeks, and he had sent Sadie an invitation. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a kill shot. He wanted her there. He wanted her to sit in the back pew, wearing a dress from a discount rack, watching him step into a higher tier of society. He wanted his new friends to look at her and whisper, "Look at the trash he left behind." Thank God he got out. Sadie didn't cry. She had stopped crying over Caleb 6 months ago when the bank threatened to repossess her car. Instead, she carefully folded the invitation, shoved it into her purse, and went to work. Work was the Continental. It was a private lounge downtown. No signage on the door, just a brass keypad, and a man named Paulie, who weighed 300 pounds and didn't smile. She was the floor manager. It was a glorified title for the person who made sure the politicians didn't spill their drinks on the high-end escorts, and that the cards at the high-stakes tables were fresh every hour. She hated the job. She hated the smell of expensive gin and cheap morals. But it paid in cash, and she needed cash. Tonight was busy. The air was thick with the low hum of deals being made in dark corners. Sadie was wiping down a spill at the corner of the mahogany bar when she felt the shift in the room. You always felt it before you saw it. The laughter dialed down. The posture of the men in expensive suits straightened. Roman Costa had walked in. He owned the Continental. He owned a lot of things. Most of the shipping yards on the east side, a dozen shell companies, and the loyalty of men who solved problems with quiet, brutal efficiency. He wasn't a caricature. He didn't wear pinstripes or smoke cigars. Roman was 34, built like a middleweight boxer, and wore bespoke charcoal suits that looked like armor. His dark hair was neatly parted, his jaw always set. He had eyes like dirty ice, cold, unreadable. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. When Roman spoke, people tripped over themselves to listen. Sadie kept her head down, tossing the damp rag into a bin behind the bar. "Sadie," the voice was quiet, but it cut through the ambient noise of the lounge. She turned. Roman was standing near the entrance of the VIP hallway. He didn't gesture for her to come over. He just waited. She smoothed down her black skirt and walked over to him. "Mr. Costa, is there a problem with the room?" "No," he said, his voice flat. Bring the nightly ledger to my office, now." He turned and walked down the hall before she could answer. Sadie exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. Her head was pounding. The invitation in her purse felt like a brick of lead. She grabbed the leather-bound ledger from the safe behind the bar and followed him. Roman's office was at the end of the hall, past 2 locked doors. It was stark. No art. Just a massive oak desk, a leather chair, and a wall of monitors showing every angle of the club. He was pouring a glass of amber liquid at a small side table when she walked in. She set the ledger on his desk. "Table 4 is up 50,000. Sadie reported, keeping her voice professional. "Senator Hayes is drinking too much again. I cut him off at 11, told the bartender to serve him ginger ale with a lime. He hasn't noticed." Roman didn't turn around. He took a sip of his drink. "And the Russians? Quiet. They lost 20 grand and tipped the dealer $100. They'll be gone in an hour." "Good." Roman finally turned. He leaned against the side table, crossing his ankles. He looked at her. Really looked at her. It made her skin prickle. "You look tired, Sadie." She stiffened. "I'm fine, Mr. Costa." "I didn't ask how you were. I made an observation." He set the glass down. "Your shift ended 20 minutes ago. Why are you still here?" "I was helping clean up. I pay cleaners for that. Go home." Sadie reached into her bag to grab her keys. As she pulled them out, the heavy, gold-embossed envelope snagged on the metal ring. It slipped from the bag, hitting the hardwood floor with a thick smack. The flap, which she had torn open earlier, popped up. The invitation slid halfway out. She froze. She lunged for it, but Roman was closer. He bent down and picked it up. "Mr. Costa, please, that's mine," Sadie said, reaching out. He ignored her. He pulled the thick cardstock from the envelope. She watched his eyes scan the elegant, curling font. His expression didn't change. Not a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Caleb Reynolds." Roman read quietly. He looked up at her. "Your ex-fiancé, the one who left you with a $40,000 debt to my bookies." She swallowed hard, dropping her hand. "Yes. He's marrying Judge Davis's daughter." "Yes." Roman tapped the heavy card against his thumb. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Sadie wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. Roman knew about Caleb. Everyone in this life knew. When Caleb ran, he had left a marker with one of Roman's underbosses. She was the one who had walked into Roman's office 6 months ago, offering to work off the debt so they wouldn't break her legs. "Why did he send you this?" Roman asked. "To humiliate me," she said. There was no point in lying to a man who made a living reading people. "He wants me to show up so he can show his new family how pathetic I am. A cautionary tale." "Are you going?" "Of course not." Sadie grabbed her keys tighter. "I'm not a masochist. I'm going to throw it in the trash, go home and sleep." Roman didn't hand the invitation back. He walked behind his desk and set it down, perfectly aligned with the edge of the blotter. He leaned over, resting his knuckles on the wood, and stared at her. "You're going," Roman said. She frowned. "Excuse me." "You are going to this wedding, Sadie?" His voice was low, smooth. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a directive. "Mr. Costa, with all due respect, I'm not going to sit in a church and watch the man who ruined my life marry someone else. I have to work that night anyway. I'm giving you the night off." Roman stood up straight. "Judge Davis has been making a lot of noise lately. He's pushing for a task force on the docks. My docks? He thinks because he's insulated by old money and high society, he's untouchable." Sadie stared at him, trying to process the shift in the conversation. "What does that have to do with me?" "The Reynolds family is weak," Roman stated, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and something sharp, like ozone. Caleb's father is a parasite trying to latch onto the Davies' influence. They want a perfect, pristine wedding to cement the alliance. A quiet, respectable affair. Roman reached out and picked up the invitation again. He held it out to her. They aren't going to get one. Sadie didn't take the card. Her heart was starting to pound against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying you are going to RSVP. +1. Roman's dark eyes locked onto hers. And I am going to be your date. The sheer absurdity of the statement hung in the air. Sadie stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But men like Roman Costa didn't tell jokes. You want to go to Caleb's wedding? She repeated slowly, making sure her brain was translating his words correctly. With me. I want to walk into a room full of politicians, judges, and old money cowards. Roman corrected, stepping back and leaning against his desk. I want to look Judge Davies in the eye on the happiest day of his daughter's life and let him know that I am in the room. I want him to know that there is no space he occupies, public or private, where I cannot reach him, and I'm just your ticket in, she said, a bitter taste rising in the back of her throat. You have an invitation. I don't. I can't do that. You don't understand. Sadie shook her head, taking a step back toward the door. If I walk in there, Caleb will gloat. His mother will make passive-aggressive comments. Chloe will look at me with pity. It's social suicide. Social suicide. Roman repeated. He scoffed, a short, harsh sound. Sadie, your social life died the day Caleb left you with a ledger full of gambling debts. You are a floor manager at an illegal casino. The society you're worried about impressing already threw you out. The words hit like a physical slap. Sadie flinched, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. It was brutal, it was cruel, but it was entirely true. So why make me go through it? She demanded, her voice rising a fraction. Why drag me into a room to be their punching bag just so you can play a power game with a judge? Roman's expression darkened. He pushed off the desk and closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. Sadie held her ground, though every instinct told her to step back. You won't be a punching bag, Roman said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Because you won't be walking in as the disgraced ex-mate. You will be walking in on my arm. He reached out, his large, rough hand catching her chin. He didn't grip it hard, but the hold was absolute. He tilted her face up. Sadie forced herself not to blink, staring directly into his pale eyes. Do you know what happens when I walk into a room, Sadie? He asked softly. People get quiet, she whispered. People get scared. He corrected. They don't whisper. They don't gossip. They look at the floor. Caleb Reynolds will not gloat. He will sweat through his tailored suit, wondering why the man who owns his gambling markers is standing next to his ex. His mother will not say a word, because she knows I own the mortgage on her summer home. And Judge Davies will spend the entire evening wondering if he's about to lose his career. His thumb brushed lightly against her jawline before he dropped his hand. Her skin burned where he had touched her. You think this is about humiliating you? Roman continued, turning his back to her and walking to his desk. It's the exact opposite. This is about handing you a loaded gun. You just have to be brave enough to pull the trigger. Sadie stood frozen in the middle of the office. A loaded gun. For 6 months, she had been the victim. She had dodged phone calls from creditors. She had ignored the sympathetic, patronizing texts from old friends who didn't want to associate with her anymore, but wanted the gossip. She had swallowed her pride, working nights in a smoky room, watching men piss away thousands of dollars while she counted pennies for the subway fare. Caleb had sent this invitation to break whatever was left of her. She looked at Roman. He was watching her, waiting. He wasn't offering her charity. This was a transaction. He needed access to the judge. She needed revenge. I owe you $22,000. she said, her voice steadying. Roman raised an eyebrow. You do. If I do this, if I walk into that venue with you, play the part, and give you the access you need to rattle Davies, the debt is gone. Roman stared at her for a long moment. The silence was heavy. She was negotiating with a predator, demanding terms from a man who usually just took what he wanted. If he said no, she would still owe him the money. She would still be working the floor for years. A slow, terrifying smirk touched the corner of Roman's mouth. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. Done, he said. The debt is cleared. Sadie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Okay then. We have a deal. We have an arrangement. Roman corrected. He picked up a pen from his desk. The wedding is in 3 weeks, black tie. I don't have a dress for a black tie event. I didn't expect you to. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and held it out to her. Go to this address tomorrow at noon. Ask for Beatrice. She will have you fitted. She took the paper. It was an address in the high-end boutique district downtown. Who's paying for it? I am, Roman said, sitting down in his leather chair. He opened a file on his desk, dismissing her. Don't be late. And Sadie? She paused at the door, looking back. Yes. When you send the RSVP, Roman said without looking up from his papers. Make sure you write my name very clearly. I want Caleb to have plenty of time to panic. 3 weeks felt like a lifetime, and a single breath all at once. Sadie spent the first 2 weeks convincing herself to call it off. The anxiety sat in her chest like a cold stone. She kept expecting Caleb to call, demanding to know if the RSVP card was a sick joke. He didn't. Neither did his mother. The silence from the Reynolds camp was deafening, and she knew exactly what it meant. Terror. Roman had been right. The moment her card landed in their mailbox, the dynamic shifted. She was no longer the pathetic ex. She was a bomb they didn't know how to defuse. On the day of the wedding, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. Sadie stood in front of the full-length mirror in her cramped bedroom, staring at a stranger. Beatrice, the stylist Roman had sent her to, hadn't just given her a dress. She had constructed armor. It was a deep, liquid emerald green. The silk clung to her ribs and fell in heavy, elegant folds to the floor. It had long sleeves and a high neckline, completely demure except for the back, which plunged into a sharp V all the way down to the base of her spine. It didn't scream for attention, it commanded it. Her hair had been pinned up in a sleek, severe twist, and her makeup was minimalist but sharp. Razor-sharp cheekbones and a dark, matte lip. She didn't look like a woman who had spent the morning eating toast over a sink. She looked like money. Old, dangerous money. A heavy knock sounded at her apartment door. Sadie grabbed a small black clutch, took a deep breath to steady her shaking hands, and walked out. Roman was standing in the dim hallway of her building. He looked entirely out of place against the peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. He wore a tuxedo. It wasn't standard rental wear. It was cut perfectly to his broad shoulders, the black fabric absorbing the terrible light. He looked her up and down. The cold, assessing gaze swept over the dress, the hair, the makeup. For a fraction of a second she thought she saw a flicker of heat in his dark eyes, but it vanished instantly, replaced by his usual stoic mask. "You look appropriate," he said. It was the highest compliment he was capable of. "You clean up okay yourself?" She replied, her voice tight. Cars downstairs. She followed him out of the building. A massive black SUV was idling at the curb, its windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors. A driver in a dark suit opened the rear door for them. She climbed in, the scent of rich leather and Roman's cedar cologne enveloping her. Roman got in beside her. The door slammed shut, cutting off the street noise. The silence in the cabin was thick. "Nervous?" Roman asked as the car pulled away from the curb. "Terrified," she admitted, staring straight ahead at the partition. "Don't be." He poured 2 glasses of sparkling water from a small console and handed her one. "You have nothing to be afraid of today." "Easy for you to say. You aren't walking into a room full of people who spent the last 6 months laughing at you." Roman shifted in his seat, turning slightly to face her. "They aren't laughing anymore. Listen to me, Sadie. When we walk through those doors, you don't look at the floor. You don't fidget with your dress. You don't look for friendly faces because there aren't any." She gripped the cold glass. "Then where do I look? At me?" Roman said smoothly. "If you feel yourself panicking, look at me. Let them see that you have the full attention of the most dangerous man in the room. Let them wonder what you had to do to get it and what you could make me do to them." Sadie swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding slowly. "Look at you. Got it." The drive to the Oak Ridge estate took 40 minutes. It was a sprawling, historic mansion on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by manicured lawns and high wrought-iron gates. As they pulled up the sweeping driveway, the rain finally broke, a light mist falling over the line of luxury cars waiting for the valets. Photographers from local society columns were clustered near the entrance, snapping photos of the city's elite as they hurried up the stone steps under large black umbrellas. Their SUV pulled to a stop at the front of the line. The driver got out and opened Roman's door, holding a massive black umbrella. Roman stepped out into the mist, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. Then he turned and held his hand out to her. Sadie looked at his large hand. This was it, the point of no return. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and entirely solid. He pulled her out of the car, tucking her hand securely into the crook of his arm. They walked up the stone steps. The flashes from the cameras went off, frantic and blinding, as the photographers recognized Roman. The heavy mahogany doors of the estate were open. A string quartet was playing somewhere inside, the soft music drifting out into the cool evening air. They stepped across the threshold, handing their coats to a pale-looking attendant who stammered when Roman looked at him. The reception hall was massive, dripping in crystal chandeliers and white roses. Hundreds of guests in tuxedos and gowns were milling about, holding champagne flutes, laughing in low murmurs. They paused at the top of the short staircase that led down into the main hall. It happened exactly the way you read about in cheap novels. It started near the door. A woman holding a drink turned, saw Roman, and froze. Her conversation stopped mid-sentence. The silence spread like a ripple in a pond. One by one, heads turned. The laughter died out. The string quartet suddenly sounded very loud in the cavernous, quiet room. Sadie kept her chin up, her back straight, her hand tight on Roman's arm. She scanned the room, and then she saw him. Caleb was standing near the center of the room, flanked by his groomsmen. He was holding a glass of scotch, a smug, relaxed smile on his face. He turned his head to see what had caused the silence. His eyes found hers. For a second there was confusion. He saw the emerald dress. He saw the sharp hair. He didn't recognize the woman he had broken. Then, recognition hit. His eyes widened, and then his gaze shifted slightly to the left. He looked at the man standing beside her. Sadie watched the exact moment Caleb Reynolds' soul left his body. His face drained of all color, going an ashy, sickly gray. His hand began to shake, the amber liquid in his glass sloshing over the rim and staining his pristine white cuff. Roman didn't smile. He just stared at Caleb, a cold, dead-eyed look that promised absolute ruin. He patted her hand resting on his arm, leaned down slightly, and murmured in her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Showtime, Sadie." They descended the stairs, and the sea of the city's untouchable elite parted for them like they were gods. The ceremony was held in the estate's converted conservatory. The vaulted glass ceiling showed the bruised, weeping sky above, while thousands of white lilies lined the aisle. They were meant to smell sweet, romantic. To Sadie, the heavy, suffocating scent just smelled like a funeral. The usher, a boy no older than 20 with a terrible spray tan, visibly shook when they approached the entrance. He held a stack of thick, cream-colored programs. He didn't ask if they were with the bride or the groom. He just handed Roman a program, his eyes fixed firmly on Roman's lapel, and stepped out of their way. "Bride's side," Roman murmured, guiding her down the left aisle. "Second row." "Second row?" She whispered back, her heels sinking slightly into the thick white carpet. "That's reserved for family." "It's reserved for power," he corrected mildly. "Keep walking." They bypassed the rows of minor cousins and college friends. Sadie felt the heat of their stares on her bare back. They were whispering. The rustle of expensive silk and taffeta was deafening as guests leaned into one another, trying to identify the man who had parted the cocktail hour like the Red Sea, and the woman on his arm who was supposed to be a tragic, forgotten footnote. They reached the second row. An older couple, Chloe's aunt and uncle, if Sadie remembered Caleb's old complaints correctly, were seated near the aisle. Roman didn't ask them to move. He stopped at the edge of the pew and simply looked down at the older man. The uncle looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His annoyance lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then his face slackened. He grabbed his wife by the elbow, pulling her up and shuffling down to the far end of the pew without uttering a single syllable. Roman held her hand, helping her slide in first. They sat down. It was a prime viewing spot. Unobstructed. Inescapable. 5 minutes later, the organ flared to life. The congregation stood. Caleb walked out from the side door, followed by the priest. He looked terrible. From a distance, in the society pages, he would look like a handsome, nervous groom. Up close, Sadie could see the sheen of cold sweat coating his forehead. His skin had a waxy, greyish undertone. He kept pulling at his collar, swallowing convulsively. As the bridal chorus began, and the heavy oak doors at the back of the conservatory swung open, Caleb didn't look down the aisle at his future wife. He looked at the second row. His eyes locked onto hers, pleading, begging. Sadie didn't give him anything. She sat perfectly still, her expression utterly blank. Then Caleb's gaze slid to Roman. Roman wasn't looking at the bride either. He was looking at Caleb. He sat leaning slightly forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped loosely together. It was a posture of relaxed, absolute dominance. He didn't glare. He didn't sneer. He just watched Caleb the way a scientist watches a rat in a maze that has no exit. Chloe Davies floated down the aisle in an explosion of white tulle and heirloom lace. She was beaming, her father walking proudly beside her. Judge Arthur Davies was a tall man with silver hair and a chest puffed out with the arrogance of a man who had spent 40 years putting people in cages while never facing a consequence of his own. When Chloe reached the altar, she took Caleb's hands. Sadie saw her brow furrow. She whispered something to him, likely asking if he was ill. Caleb shook his head, a jerky, spastic motion, and forced a smile that looked like a grimace. The priest began the liturgy. It was supposed to be a grand, drawn-out affair, but the tension in the room was a living, breathing thing. It was thick and suffocating. The priest, sensing the poisoned atmosphere, began to rush. He clipped his words, skipping over the longer passages about patience and endurance, hurrying toward the vows. "Do you, Caleb, take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Caleb hesitated. It was only 3 seconds, but in a quiet room, 3 seconds is an eternity. He looked at the priest. Then his eyes darted back to Roman. Roman unclasped his hands and slowly, deliberately, adjusted his right cufflink. Caleb flinched. "I do," he croaked, his voice cracked. Someone in the back row coughed nervously. "And do you, Chloe?" As the vows concluded, Sadie realized something fundamental had shifted inside her. She had spent 6 months dreading the thought of Caleb moving on. She had imagined this exact day, crying in her shower, feeling like she wasn't enough, not wealthy enough, not connected enough, not ruthless enough to keep him. Sitting there, watching him sweat through his custom tuxedo, terrified of the man sitting beside her, she didn't feel heartbroken. She felt a cold, sharp disgust. He was a coward. He had always been a coward. She just hadn't seen it until Roman Costa forced her to look. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. The kiss was brief, lacking any warmth. They turned to face the crowd. Caleb's eyes bypassed the cheering family and landed right back on them. Roman stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. He didn't clap. He reached down, offering her his hand. Sadie took it, standing up beside him. "Time for a drink," Roman said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the altar. The grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge estate had been transformed into a winter wonderland. White roses cascaded from the ceilings, dripping in crystal chains. Waiters circled with silver trays of champagne and caviar. Roman left Sadie standing near a towering ice sculpture to get them drinks from the main bar. The moment he stepped away, the invisible barrier that had kept the guests at bay evaporated. The whispers started again, louder this time. She ignored them, keeping her eyes fixed on the entrance. She knew it was coming. "Sadie." She turned. Caleb was standing there. He had abandoned his new bride somewhere in the sea of well-wishers. He looked frantic. The polite, polished veneer he wore for his country club friends was gone. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, stepping closer. He smelled like expensive scotch and sour panic. "You invited me, Caleb," she said, keeping her voice level. "Heavy cardstock, gold foil. I thought it would be rude not to RSVP. Don't play games with me." He snapped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the bar. "Do you know who that is? Do you have any idea who you brought into this room?" "He's my +1. "He's a criminal." Caleb's voice pitched up, entirely out of his control. "He's a loan shark, Sadie. He's the mob. What the hell is wrong with you? My father-in-law is a federal judge." "I know," she said, taking a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back. "Your father-in-law is a judge, and you are a man who owes $50,000 to a syndicate that breaks fingers for a living. I wonder what Judge Davies would think if he knew his new son-in-law bought that ring with money he stole from his ex-fiancée and leveraged a gambling debt to do it." Caleb turned pale green. "You wouldn't." "I don't have to," a calm, chilling voice said from behind her. Roman stepped up to her side, holding 2 glasses of gin over ice. He didn't hand her hers yet. He just stood there, looking at Caleb. The temperature in their small corner of the ballroom plummeted. Caleb froze. He looked like he wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't work. "Mr. Reynolds," Roman said smoothly, "congratulations on your nuptials." "Mr. Costa," Caleb choked out. I wasn't expecting you, clearly." Roman took a slow sip of his drink. "I was just telling Sadie how beautiful the estate is. A very expensive venue. Caterers, strings, security. It must have cost a small fortune." Roman lowered his glass. His eyes locked onto Caleb's. "It makes a man wonder why you haven't been answering your phone. My associates have been trying to reach you regarding an outstanding balance. Caleb swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. "I just got married today. I have the money. I'm going to pay it. The trust fund. It unlocks next month. I swear, a married man should start with a clean slate. Roman said, stepping closer. He was completely invading Caleb's space now, towering over him slightly. Debts are an ugly thing to bring into a new home. They fester. They rot the foundation. Tell me, Caleb, does Chloe know you like to play high-stakes baccarat at illegal tables? Does she know you're terrible at it? Please, Caleb whispered, actual tears welling in the corners of his eyes. Please, not today. Don't do this today. I'm not doing anything, Caleb. Roman said softly. I'm just attending a wedding. Enjoy the party. Roman handed Sadie her glass. He didn't look at Caleb again. He dismissed him entirely, which was somehow more degrading than a threat. Caleb practically fled, pushing his way through a group of elderly women to get to the other side of the room. Sadie took a large swallow of the gin. It burned going down, settling the nerves that were fraying at the edges of her composure. He's going to throw up, she muttered. He's going to do worse than that when the week is over. Roman said flatly. Before she could ask what he meant, the crowd parted again. This time, it wasn't fear that moved them. It was respect. Judge Arthur Davies was walking toward them, his hands clasped behind his back. He had the kind of face that belonged on a bronze coin, stern, patrician, entirely devoid of warmth. He stopped a few feet away, flanked by two men who looked remarkably like plainclothes security. Mr. Costa, Judge Davies said. His voice was a deep, booming baritone used to commanding courtrooms. Judge Davies. Roman replied. He didn't offer his hand. I was surprised to see your name on the guest list, the judge said, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't look at her. She was furniture. She was irrelevant. I wasn't aware you moved in these circles. I move wherever I please, Arthur, Roman said. The use of the first name was deliberate, a blatant disrespect. The judge's jaw tightened. You have a lot of nerve walking into my daughter's wedding? Davies said, lowering his voice so the surrounding guests couldn't hear. I'm putting together a task force, Costa. Your shipping crates at Pier 40 are going to be gutted by the end of the quarter. Your friends at City Hall can't protect you from a federal warrant. Roman didn't blink. He took another sip of his drink. Pier 40 is a legitimate logistical enterprise. You're welcome to waste taxpayer money searching empty boxes. We both know they aren't empty. What I know, Roman said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register, is that you are a very busy man. Task forces require focus, attention to detail. A man can't focus if his house isn't in order. The judge frowned. My house is perfectly in order. Is it? Roman tilted his head towards the far side of the room, where Caleb was furiously downing a glass of champagne, his hands still visibly shaking. Your new son-in-law looks a little stressed. Marriage is a heavy burden, especially for a man with a gambling addiction and a penchant for borrowing money from unsavory people. Judge Davies stiffened. The color drained from his face as he looked from Roman to Caleb, and then finally, for the first time, to Sadie. Recognition dawned in his eyes. He knew who she was, and he suddenly realized exactly what kind of trap his daughter had just married into. You wouldn't, the judge hissed. I don't have to. Roman echoed the exact words Sadie had used with Caleb earlier. He smiled, a cold, empty expression. He owes me, Arthur. The marker is substantial. If you want to come for my docs, come for them. But the day you sign that warrant, I call in Caleb's debt, and if he can't pay, I'll take it out of your daughter's inheritance. Or perhaps I'll just let the press know that the great Judge Davies' son-in-law is funding his lifestyle through organized crime. The judge stood perfectly still. The silence between the two men was violently loud. The power dynamic in the room shifted, tipping completely and irrevocably in Roman's favor. Enjoy the caviar, Arthur, Roman said. He placed his empty glass on a passing waiter's tray. "Sadie, I believe they're clearing the floor for the first dance." The band, a 12-piece orchestra in matching white tuxedos, began to play a slow, sweeping waltz. Caleb and Chloe took to the center of the polished marble floor. Chloe looked radiant, oblivious to the storm raging around her. Caleb looked like he was walking to the gallows. He kept glancing over her shoulder, searching for Roman in the crowd. "Come on," Roman said, touching the small of her back. He guided her through the crowd and out onto the floor. Several other couples were joining, eager to share the spotlight. Roman pulled Sadie close. She stiffened for a second. She had never been this physically close to him. He was a wall of solid muscle beneath the tailored wool of his suit. "Relax," he ordered quietly. "You're supposed to look like you want to be here." She let out a shaky breath and placed her right hand in his left, resting her other hand on his shoulder. He placed his hand on the bare skin of her lower back. The contrast of his warm, rough palm against her cold skin made her shiver. They moved. Roman wasn't a man who danced for enjoyment, but he moved with the same brutal, precise efficiency he used for everything else. He led, flawlessly, forcing her to follow his exact rhythm. "You destroyed him," she murmured, keeping a polite, frozen smile on her face for the benefit of anyone watching. "I stated facts," Roman corrected, steering them around an older couple. "He destroyed himself. I just handed the hammer to his father-in-law. The judge won't sign the warrant now." "No, he won't." Roman looked down at her. His eyes were unreadable, calculating. "He'll spend the next year quietly trying to pay off Caleb's debt to keep the scandal out of the papers. By the time he finishes, I'll have moved the shipments to a different port. Checkmate. So, you got what you wanted. I always get what I want." Sadie looked away from him, focusing on the lapel of his jacket. The heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in her stomach for 6 months was gone. But it was replaced by something else. A hollow, terrifying emptiness. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a strange, quiet realization in its wake. The debt was paid. The job was done. After tonight, she would go back to her cramped apartment. She wouldn't have to work the floor at the Continental anymore. She was free. Why did freedom feel so cold? "You did well," Roman said. The sudden compliment surprised her. She looked back up. He was watching her face carefully. "Most people crumble when they step into a room like this. You didn't flinch." "I had an excellent human shield." Roman's hand tightened slightly on her lower back, pulling her a fraction of an inch closer. The air between them crackled, thick and sudden. "I don't play shield for anyone, Sadie," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur that barely reached her ears over the swelling strings of the orchestra. "You walked in here and owned this room. You made a man who thought you were nothing realize you were dangerous. Only because I'm with you. Power by proxy is still power," he replied. "You adapt quickly. You understand the currency of leverage. It's a rare trait." She frowned, studying his face. "Are you giving me a performance review, Mr. Costa?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "I'm assessing an asset. You don't belong on the floor pouring drinks for drunk politicians, Sadie. You're too smart for that life, and too ruthless for this one." He gestured slightly with his chin toward the spinning crowd of elites. "Where do I belong, then?" she asked. It was a genuine question. Her old life was dead. Her temporary life as a debtor was over. She was untethered. Roman stopped moving. They were in the middle of the floor, the other couple spinning past them, a blur of color and light. He stared down at her. The cold, impenetrable ice in his eyes had fractured, revealing something dark and entirely consuming underneath. "That depends," Roman said softly, his thumb brushing slowly against her spine, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her brain. "Are you ready to stop pretending?" Sadie opened her mouth to answer, But before she could find the words, a sudden, sharp sound echoed through the ballroom. It wasn't the clinking of glasses. It wasn't laughter. It was the unmistakable sound of breaking glass, followed immediately by a woman's terrified scream. Roman's demeanor shifted in a microsecond. The man leading her in a waltz vanished, replaced instantly by the predator. He shoved her behind him, his hand reaching inside his jacket as he turned toward the source of the noise. Near the entrance of the ballroom, 3 men had walked in. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing heavy leather jackets, and the man in the center was holding a sawed-off shotgun, the barrel still smoking from where he had blasted a hole into the ceiling's chandelier. The music stopped dead. "Nobody move!" the man with the shotgun roared, his eyes scanning the screaming crowd. "Where is he? Where's Costa?" Roman didn't draw his weapon. He stood perfectly still, a massive, unmoving wall between her and the threat. "Stay exactly where you are," Roman ordered her, his voice devoid of fear, devoid of anything except absolute, lethal intent. "Don't move, don't speak." The wedding was over. The war had just begun. Panic is not a sound. It is a physical weight. It crushed the air out of the grand ballroom in a fraction of a second, replacing the faint smell of white roses and expensive perfume with the sharp, acidic stench of cordite and terror. The man with the shotgun pumped the action. The heavy clack-clack echoed over the shrieks of the city's elite. Men who commanded boardrooms and dictated laws scrambled like insects, diving beneath linen-draped tables. Women in thousands of dollars of silk tripped over their own heels, crawling blindly toward the exits. Sadie didn't scream. She couldn't. The air was trapped in her lungs. She stood completely frozen behind the broad, unmoving line of Roman's shoulders. "There he is!" the man on the left yelled, pointing a heavy, matte-black handgun directly at them. They weren't here for the judge. They weren't here for Caleb. They were here for the man who owned the city's underworld, banking on the fact that he had walked into enemy territory without his usual army. It was a calculated risk. It was a fatal miscalculation. Roman didn't duck. He didn't shout for help. His right hand moved with a blinding mechanical fluidity. He drew a suppressed pistol from beneath his tuxedo jacket. He didn't aim with one eye closed like in the movies. He just raised his arm, both eyes wide open, cold and dead, and pulled the trigger twice. Pft, pft. The hollow, coughing sound of the suppressed weapon was barely audible over the screaming. The man pointing the handgun dropped instantly, his body hitting the polished marble floor with a sickening, heavy thud. A dark pool of red began to spread rapidly across the pristine white tiles. The man with the shotgun roared, swinging the barrel toward them. Roman stepped backward, his left arm shooting out to wrap around her waist. He practically lifted her off her feet, violently throwing her behind the thick pillar of the ice sculpture just as the shotgun fired. The deafening blast shattered the sculpture. Shards of ice exploded outward like shrapnel, raining down on the floor, mixing with the spilled champagne and the blood. A jagged piece grazed her cheek, a sharp, stinging bite that snapped her out of her paralysis. "Stay down!" Roman barked, his voice devoid of panic. He sounded like he was giving an order on a busy warehouse floor. He leaned out from behind the ruined ice and fired 3 more times. She heard a wet gargle, followed by the crash of a catering table collapsing. Sadie kept her back pressed hard against the cold marble pillar, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She looked to her left. Under a table 10 feet away, Caleb was curled into a fetal position. He had both hands clamped over his ears, his eyes squeezed shut, weeping openly. He had left his new bride somewhere in the stampede. He was entirely alone, consumed by his own cowardice. She felt nothing for him. Not pity. Not anger. He was a ghost to her now. "Move," Roman commanded. His hand gripped her bicep, hauling her up. She didn't question him. She didn't hesitate. She gripped the heavy fabric of her emerald skirt in one hand, hiking it up past her knees, and ran. They didn't head for the main exit. That was a choke point, blocked by screaming guests and trampled bodies. Roman steered her toward the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. The third attacker, a younger man with frantic, terrified eyes, stepped into their path, raising his weapon. Roman didn't even slow down. He didn't bother shooting. As they closed the distance, Roman threw his left shoulder forward, slamming into the man's chest with the force of a freight train. The impact shattered the man's ribs with a loud crack. He flew backward, crashing through the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. They stepped over him. The kitchen was abandoned, pots boiling over on the massive industrial stoves, the staff having fled through the loading docks. "Keep moving," Roman said, his eyes scanning the stainless steel counters. "Out the service door." They burst through the heavy metal fire door into the cool, damp night. The rain had started again, a heavy downpour that washed away the scent of gunpowder. The valet line was total chaos. Cars were backed up, horns blaring as drivers abandoned vehicles to run for the main gates. Roman ignored the line. He dragged her toward a black sedan parked illegally near the dumpsters. He didn't reach for keys. He slammed the butt of his pistol against the driver's side window. The safety glass shattered. He reached in, unlocked the door, and ripped the steering column casing off with his bare hands. "Get in," he ordered, pulling the passenger door open for her. Sadie slid into the leather seat, her hands shaking violently as the adrenaline began to curdle into shock. Roman dropped into the driver's seat. He stripped 2 wires, sparked them, and the engine roared to life. He threw it into gear, and they tore out of the service lot, fishtailing wildly before the heavy tires found traction on the wet asphalt. They smashed through the lowered wooden arm of the rear exit gate, leaving the Oak Ridge estate and the ruined wedding far behind in the rearview mirror. The silence in the car was heavier than the gunfire. Roman drove with relentless focus. His face was a mask of cold fury, illuminated only by the rhythmic passing of the orange streetlights. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He was already working out the logistics of the retaliation. The men at the wedding were just foot soldiers. Someone had given the order. Someone was going to die before morning. Sadie stared out the passenger window, watching the rain streak across the glass. She touched her cheek. Her fingers came away wet with a mixture of melted ice and blood. The shaking started deep in her chest. It wasn't just fear. It was the sheer, unadulterated shock of proximity to death. 30 minutes ago she was dancing a waltz. Now she was fleeing a crime scene in a stolen car with a murderer. "Breathe, Sadie," Roman said, his voice cutting through the dark cabin. He didn't look at her, keeping his eyes on the road. "Slow it down. In through your nose, out through your mouth." She tried to obey, drawing a shaky breath. "Who are they?" "Russians, the Volkov syndicate." His tone was strictly business. "They lost heavily at the Continental last week. It was a pretext. They wanted to test the waters, see if I was distracted playing politics with the judge. They saw an opening. They shot up a federal judge's daughter's wedding." She whispered, the reality setting in. "The police will be everywhere. The police will be exactly where I want them to be." Roman corrected smoothly. He checked his rearview mirror, taking a sharp left turn into an industrial district on the edge of the city. "Judge Davies will suppress the details to protect his family's reputation. He'll call it a random robbery. The Volkovs will be dead by sunrise. The problem solves itself." The absolute certainty in his voice chilled her. He was playing chess on a board where the pieces bled, and he didn't care who got swept off the table. They pulled into the underground parking garage of a high-rise condominium. It wasn't the Continental. It wasn't the docks. It was quiet, sterile, and heavily fortified. Roman killed the engine. The sudden silence was ringing in her ears. He unclipped his seatbelt, turning in his seat to finally look at her. His cold eyes swept over her ruined appearance. Her hair had fallen out of its severe twist, hanging in damp, tangled strands around her shoulders. The emerald dress was stained with dirty water and someone else's blood. The cut on her cheek was still slowly weeping red. For the first time all night, the impenetrable mask cracked. A flicker of something dangerously close to concern passed through his eyes. He reached out, his thumb gently swiping just below the cut on her cheek, wiping away the blood. His touch was shockingly gentle for a man who had just broken another man's ribcage. "You're hurt," he murmured. "It's just ice," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. He let his thumb rest against her jaw. "I told you that you wouldn't be a punching bag today. I broke my word. I put you in the line of fire." "You put me behind a pillar," she corrected, leaning ever so slightly into the warmth of his hand. She didn't know why she did it. It was instinctual, the need for an anchor in the middle of a hurricane. "I knew what you were when I made the deal." Roman's eyes darkened. He dropped his hand, abruptly severing the connection, and opened his door. "Come on, we need to get you cleaned up." They took a private elevator straight to the penthouse. The doors slid open to reveal a massive, starkly modern apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering, jagged skyline of the city. There were no personal photos, no art on the walls. It looked like a luxury hotel room waiting for a guest who would never actually live there. Roman walked straight to a wet bar in the corner of the expansive living room. He grabbed a bottle of bourbon, pouring a generous measure into a crystal glass. He walked back to her and pressed the glass into her hands. "Drink," he ordered. Sadie took a swallow. The liquor burned a fiery trail down her throat, grounding her. She took another, longer drink, letting the heat settle in her stomach. Roman watched her. He hadn't poured one for himself. He took his phone from his pocket, typing out a rapid series of messages, giving the orders, orchestrating the bloodbath that would happen while the city slept. "You can take the master bedroom," Roman said, putting the phone face down on the glass coffee table. "There's a first aid kit in the master bath, clothes in the closet. My men will drop off a secure car for you in the morning. Your debt is wiped clean. You can walk out of here tomorrow, and you never have to step foot in the Continental again." Sadie stared at him over the rim of her glass. He was dismissing her. The transaction was complete. "Just like that?" she asked. "Just like that." Roman pulled off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it over the back of a leather sofa. His white dress shirt was pulled taut across his shoulders, the shoulder holster stark and dark against the pale fabric. "You wanted out, Sadie. You got out. The judge is neutralized. Caleb is a broken man. You won." Sadie walked slowly into the center of the room, her bare feet sinking into the thick rug. She had left her heels in the stolen car. "I saw Caleb hiding under a table," she said quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "When the shooting started, he left Chloe. He just curled up and hid." Roman unbuckled his holster, laying the weapon on the table. "He's a coward. Men like him only have power when the rules protect them. The moment the rules disappear, they break. And you don't." "I make the rules," Roman said simply. Sadie set the half-empty glass of bourbon down next to his gun. The clink of crystal against glass echoed in the quiet room. "I spent 6 months thinking I wasn't enough for him," she confessed, looking out at the city lights. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the glowing grid of the streets below. "I thought if I had just been born into the right family or had the right trust fund, he would have stayed. I let him make me feel like a victim." She turned back to look at Roman. He was leaning against the back of the sofa, watching her with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thin. "Tonight, I watched a room full of the most powerful people in this city soil themselves," she continued, her voice steadying, growing stronger. I watched a judge realize he was powerless. I watched my ex-fiancée cry. And I realized something. What did you realize, Sadie? Roman asked, his voice a low rumble, that their power is a lie. She took a step toward him. It's all paper and legacy. It shatters the second someone like you walks into the room. Roman didn't move as Sadie closed the distance between them. He remained perfectly still, a predator observing a sudden change in its environment. Paper burns. Roman said quietly. Legacy rots. Force is the only universal language. You learned a hard lesson tonight. I learned that I don't want to go back to being a civilian, she said. The words hung in the air, irrevocable. It was a dangerous truth, one she hadn't even fully admitted to herself until this very moment. She didn't want the quiet, desperate life of dodging creditors. She didn't want to go back to pretending that the polite society that threw her away had any real value. She had tasted the raw, unfiltered adrenaline of living on the edge of the blade, and she realized she liked the view. Roman's jaw tightened. Don't be foolish, Sadie. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. It makes people think they want things they can't handle. Tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up and the shock wears off, you're going to want your quiet apartment. No, I won't. Sadie stopped just a foot away from him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You said it yourself on the dance floor. I adapt quickly. I understand leverage. I didn't flinch. You are shaking right now, he pointed out, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands. I'm shaking because I'm cold and because I almost died. She shot back, lifting her chin. But I'm not crying. I'm not hiding. I'm standing here negotiating with you. Again! Roman's eyes narrowed. The space between them felt impossibly charged. What exactly are you negotiating for? A job. You had a job. You hated it. I hated managing drunks and counting chips for a debt I didn't earn. She corrected him. I want to work for you. Really work for you. You need someone who can walk into a room of elites and blend in. Someone who knows their names, their trusts, their pressure points. Your men are muscle. They command fear, but they don't command respect in a boardroom. I do. Roman stared at her. The silence stretched, thick and dangerous. He was weighing her, calculating her value, her breaking point. This isn't a game. Roman warned, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harsh and unforgiving. This isn't revenge on your ex anymore. If you step into this life, there is no stepping out. There are no 2 weeks' notice. If you betray me, I won't fire you. I will bury you. I know. You will see things that will ruin your sleep for the rest of your life. You will be complicit in things that would make the good Judge Davies lock you in a dark hole forever. Judge Davies is corrupt. His laws are just suggestions for the wealthy. Stop trying to scare me with a morality I already know is fake. A heavy breath escaped Roman's chest. The rigid tension in his shoulders finally broke. He reached out, both of his large hands gripping her waist. He pulled her flush against his chest. The sudden contact was a shock to her system, hot and solid against the damp silk of her ruined dress. I'm not trying to scare you, Roman murmured, leaning down so his mouth was hovering just inches from hers. I am giving you one last chance to run away before I lock the door. I'm not running. Good. He didn't kiss her gently. There was no romance in it, no flowery hesitation. It was a collision. His mouth came down on hers with a brutal, claiming intensity that stole the remaining breath from her lungs. It tasted like expensive bourbon, adrenaline, and absolute, unchecked power. She didn't shrink back. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers digging into the thick, dark hair at the nape of his neck, kissing him back with a fierce, desperate hunger. The last 6 months of humiliation, of fear, of feeling small and insignificant, burned away in the heat of his touch. Roman broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. His breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling rapidly against her own. "You belong to me now, Sadie," he whispered, a dark, possessive promise. "You don't bow to anyone ever again. Not Caleb, not the judge. Only me." "I don't bow to you either," she breathed, looking up into his pale, dangerous eyes. A slow, terrifying smirk, the second one she had ever seen, spread across Roman Costa's face. It was the look of a man who had just found the perfect weapon. "No," he agreed softly, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, brushing over the dried blood on her cheek. "You stand beside me. Let them burn." The heavy cardstock invitation to her own humiliation had been meant to break her. Instead, it had just introduced the city to its new queen. The game of power is ruthless, but surviving it means learning how to rewrite the rules. Sadie didn't just walk out of the ashes of her old life, she built an empire on them. If you loved this journey of betrayal, vengeance, and a dark, unbreakable partnership, hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is unbothered success. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next thrilling, immersive Mafia romance drama. What would you have done in Sadie's shoes? Tell us in the comments.